everyone, this is Bill Griffin. Welcome to Different Take Podcast. If you like this content, please subscribe, like, share, comment. Really appreciate you watching. Today I want to talk again about the violence in public schools, specifically Gwinnett County, Georgia public school system. There's a bit of a debate about these what's called restorative discipline practices. And I listened to a radio show not long ago. It was broadcast on December 21, 2022, and a couple of the panelists are advocates for restorative discipline practices. So I want to play some clips and then provide some commentary because I thought it was pretty interesting. But before I do that, I thought I'd share some background, a little bit of background about the school system and what has happened. The school board voted in August of 2022 to implement what's called JCDI. And you can find this on the Gwinnett County Public School website. Without going through all of it, the intent is to reduce out-of-school suspensions or use them as a last resort. So what has happened, in my opinion, is if you had a low standard, and there's evidence for this, you don't have to take my word for it. You can go back and look at the school board meetings prior to August, and you'll see complaints from teachers and parents about the discipline, or about the behavior, I should say. So I contend those standards were too low, and then they lowered them even further. There's a debate about whether or not this policy will be effective or not. A little more background, I interviewed a University of Georgia professor, Peter Smagorinsky, who was retired, but that was his job, was to teach teachers. And he, in his evaluation, was that this implementing this policy would really require doing it on a small scale, not on this giant scale in the whole school system. The administration says no, it's all or nothing. And so the school board unanimously voted to implement this policy, and the superintendent, Calvin Watts, he's only been on the job not very long. He took over from a gentleman named Alvin Wilbanks. But Mr. Watts has announced in December that they were pausing this program. So that's a little background. If you already knew that, I apologize, but I thought it should get up to speed if you're not familiar with the situation. This radio program, as I said, occurred December 21st. By the way, I should also say that Mr. Watts taking over from Mr. Wilbanks, or Mr. Wilbanks being terminated, cost the county $500,000. There's a lot of upset people about that decision, but the school board terminated Mr. Wilbanks and brought Mr. Watts in, and one of the reasons they did was to try to fulfill their drive for equity. Because you hear that word a lot in the school board meetings and by school board members. So this program aired December 21st. The panelists for this program were Anthony Downer, youth organizer for Gwinnett Stop, Marlon Tillman, co-founder and executive director of Gwinnett Stop, and Selena Evans, former Gwinnett County special education teacher. It's entitled School Discipline Forum. Mr. Downer and Ms. Tillman are advocates for these restorative discipline practices. And this was broadcast on December 21st. The program was called On Point with Wandlin Stokes, entitled School Discipline Forum, 1380 News and Talk, WAOK Radio. I'll send that to Atlanta. You can find this online. If you want to listen to the whole thing, it's kind of lengthy. It lasts a bit over an hour. But before I start, I want to play some clips and then provide some commentary. And this is a little longer episode than I normally do. But before I start, what are restorative discipline practices? I think there are several definitions, but the first thing I pull up when I go online is proactive school strategies to create a sense of community, build healthy relationships, and develop conflict resolution skills, sense of belonging, and agency. Restorative processes like circles, conflict resolution programs, peer-led practices, and tribunals to respond to incidents that cause harm. This all sounds very well and good. And I've talked about this before on other episodes. I think when you remove consequences and punishment, this whole idea, and frankly, for most students, this whole thing is not necessary. The social emotional learning, restorative discipline practice are not necessary for the vast majority of students. I think it's batshit crazy. And I've said that. And listening to this radio broadcast, I didn't come to a different conclusion. But, well, let me play some clips for you. This is Anthony Downer, who calls himself an abolitionist educator.
The fight clubs and the dealing that's going on in northern white schools in Gwinnett County. But you see that exposes the folly and the manufactured crisis that we're facing today, that many people in positions of power with the loudest voices are not actually about Black and brown students. They just want to use this moment for a political fight.
So he mentions the word fight club, and this shortly after he talks about a manufactured crisis, but this has gotten a lot of media attention in the Atlanta area. Television, radio have been reporting on a lot of different incidents. The administration has data that says, yes, there's a lot more violence, a lot more fighting. You have teachers literally weeping at board meetings. Students are asking to get things under control. The parents are really upset. And even the school board members, which I've talked about in past episodes, agree that something needs to be done. But Mr. Downer calls it a manufactured crisis. This is Marlon Tillman.
But we think that discipline is really about teaching conflict resolution, doing mediation, learning how to discuss, and then be able to see another person's position. Currently, we're not doing that. We look into our society, we're not doing that there either. So how do we change the direction of that? We have to start to talk to each other. We have to teach our children how to talk to each other. How do you disagree, without being disagreed? How do you take in that you've hurt someone, feel that, and then be able to atone for that?
What I hear her saying is that you must have mediation and atonement after some disruptive or violent behavior in school with students. Say two students are fighting. One student may be perfectly innocent. The things she's talking about sound all well and good. The issue is she does not believe in any sort of consequences other than these mediation circles and things like that. The only consequences I heard her say in the broadcast would be legal consequences, where it wouldn't be the school, but it would actually be the criminal justice system stepping in. So minor infractions that aren't necessarily something that you would prosecute a student over. She does not address any sort of specific classroom disruption that should be punished in the entire podcast, or in the letter that they sent out that I criticized in a prior episode. I criticized this group in episode 117 a few weeks ago. This is Marlon Tillman talking about circles.
Between them, where they had a disagreement, meaning the children started convening their own circles. If they were wrong, we have to have a circle. And they'd sit people down and start to have this circle.
Adults don't do this, do they? Circles. You're going to force a kid that was bullied to sit around in a circle with the kids that bullied the student. Talking about things that have been done for teachers and students do these. You resolve conflicts and you learn social skills. But that's not the school's place to take over the role of the parents. This is a caller to the show. The host takes his caller's comments and questions. His name is Jihad.
Say this. I think teachers should call a news conference and let the public know how bad this situation is. I think the teachers, we met with a group a couple of days ago, last week, and the young lady, she said she's not coming back. She's not going back. And there are many teachers, honestly speaking, they weren't trained to, and neither should they have to, retrain our children in their behavior. That's something that should take place in the...
I think where Marlon Tillman and Anthony Dowder get way off track, and other people that advocate for this, is the idea that government can do this. That government can step in and do the things that you need to do at home to prepare students, your children, for behaving properly at school. And this gentleman makes that point very well. And Jihad also makes a good point that teachers are not psychologists. They're not trained to do this. And that is what Mr. Downer and Ms. Tillman are advocating for. This is Selena Jones on the panel talking about teacher retention.
With what you're saying, as a teacher, teachers are at their wits' end. And there are many of us, there are retention checks now for many districts to try and keep teachers. And every time there's a break, more teachers leave. Teachers sort of set this, I'm going to make it to Christmas. I'm going to make it to spring break. I'm just going to try and make it to May. That's been a thing now for a couple years where teachers are barely hanging on. I agree that there are inequities when it comes to our children. As an educator, I absolutely feel like we are creating unsafe, uncivil environments by removing consequences. Have children, these brawls that we're seeing now. We've been seeing these for easily I guess since they came back from COVID,
Teachers are at their wits' end, yet Anthony Downer complains that it's a manufactured crisis. At no point in this broadcast do Mr. Downer or Ms. Tillman discuss this. The idea that there's brawling. In fact, Mr. Downer belittles disruptive behavior in his next clip.
I'm really disappointed, I think, in a lot of tropes and stereotypes, the generalizations of our students as violent, as addicted to their phones. When we talk about our students today, we're talking about brilliant geniuses. And our job as educators and supporters of education is to uncover a lot of that brilliance.
So there's two things here. You're saying that students are being stereotyped. Everyone is saying the violence exists. Even this group is saying this in this 5-page letter they sent out, I think it was in November. They're saying that the schools are too violent. But Mr. Downer has resentment over speaking the truth, apparently. The other thing I thought was kind of, I question, is this idea that he's trying to promote, maybe he's not doing this, but this is what I interpret, is that students today have more natural intelligence than those of 20, 30, 100 years ago, that humans had changed that much in such a short amount of time that they're just naturally more intelligent. I don't think there's any evidence to support that. It's kind of a strange thing to assert, in my opinion. I'm not going to play the clip, but he also says a little later that the schools are using outdated practices. I guess the things that worked in the past we should ditch for experimental. Now he claims they're not experimental in another clip, but he says teachers need training. What? To become mental health care professionals. That's for that's perfectly fine to have refer students for health care. It makes perfect sense. But the teachers, that's not their job. He says that teachers are teaching, and in today's world and the students and the world that we have yet to see, I don't think history has changed that much. The practices, why not employ the best practices? You have a school that has very high behavior of their students. They have very low incidents of disruptions or violence. You'd want to put those practices in place, not something experimental. He also said something I thought was strange. Teachers don't have emotional intelligence. Well, then they're not going to be capable of doing what you say they need to do. So this is pretty deep into this broadcast, 42 minutes or so, where Mr. Anthony Downer talks about a couple of scenarios, talking back and watching porn. There should be no consequences.
And behavior, when we look at the high numbers of referrals and tribunals that has happened in Gwinnett schools, we're not talking about all fights, it's about teachers writing students up for talking back. That's something a teacher should be able to handle within the classroom. We're talking about students being sent to the gift center or alternative schools for watching porn. It
depends on the situation. I'm taking the worst case scenario. If my child went into school and said, and Mr. Downer's the teacher, and my child walks in late, Mr. Downer says, just doesn't say anything and just looks at my child, and they say, F you, Mr. Downer, in a loud voice for the whole class. I would want to know about that, and I wouldn't have any problem with an out-of-school suspension in that case. If there's no scenario where you could say that's okay. When he talks about watching porn, if a student is watching porn in class in front of other students and disrupting class with their watching of pornographic material, I think a punishment's in order. I think most parents think the way that I do. So he mentions this cavalierly, but yes, it could be, you could identify talking back in a different way. It doesn't have to be as aggressive as the scenario I mentioned, but he doesn't talk about specifics. So I assume the two scenarios I bring up, he's perfectly fine with zero punishment. That would include removing them from the classroom. Seemed to me you'd be setting an example to the other students so you can't disrupt class in that manner. But this is the caller, Jihad, disagreeing with Mr. Downer.
Well, first of all, to attempt to divide age as some explanation for simple behavior, simple common sense, courtesy, and behavior. To say that I said that all of our students were troublemakers. Never once did I say that. The topic is discipline in schools. Obviously, we're having an issue with the disciplines. What I suggest that this particular gentleman do private school with these dreams that you're talking about, and let us see your model work. And then when we see your model work, then we'll follow your model. We grew up in schools without education. Beg your pardon?
My model has worked. There were no fights in my school.
I said you open up the model that you're talking about.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jihad. Close out your statement.
So never once did I say and condemn our children. You know what I mean? We went to school and we didn't have Black history. That didn't mean that we came in there cursing the teachers out. We went to school under segregation and all type of racism. That didn't mean we came to school upsetting the status quo. So all the reasons he gives to say that we're under some major attack and you old people don't know what the hell y'all talking about. We raised children. He's 28, five, 6 children. I raised grandchildren. So I mean, I'm totally, to be honest with you, insulted that a 28-year-old who hasn't raised anybody can sit here and tell us that our method of raising children is outdated and we have to come up with some superficial technique that he hasn't implemented himself yet.
So there's no buy-in from this gentleman at all. He's correct that Mr. Downer, if there is a model where it's actually worked, this gentleman's saying, well, show it to me. And in no time has Mr. Downer or Ms. Tillman during this broadcast mentioned an example of a school anywhere, the name of the school where they've tried this and it's been successful. And what is successful? That also goes for the 5-page letter that they put out in December. They don't mention any sort of school where this has actually been very successful and everybody loves it.
Other piece is you mentioned younger teachers. I'm not sure if your teachers aren't choosing this path. We don't have any student teachers. I haven't seen a student teacher since before COVID. So I'm not sure where the young teachers that you're referring to, where they are being placed, because I haven't had a student teacher since before COVID. This issue, as I said, I agree with you wholeheartedly that it is big and something needs to be done. I just don't think that removing consequences for extreme behaviors, and I've never heard of a child being paneled or having a tribunal for something like talking back. But the things that when we're talking about children being jumped or children threatening teachers and the kid is back and the ink dries on the referral, these are the things that are causing us to leave in growth.
So that's Selena Evans, teacher, saying this experimental program, it's deeper than theory. Teachers aren't going to tolerate the workplace conditions that aren't safe. It's experimental. There's no buy-in on her part. So is there buy-in from the public? No. There's been plenty of school board meetings where parents, students, teachers have come forward and said this policy is not working. Some actually agree with the policy and say, well, they don't have the training. I've got news for you. If you think it's going to work, that's not. Emotional and psychological counseling for young people. That's for mental health care professionals. Teachers don't have those years of training, but you're asking teachers to do the impossible. And I think that's what Ms. Evans was saying there. It's not the school's job to provide medication such as antidepressants or any more than it's their job to provide medication for other things, physical ailments and that sort of thing. It's for a school nurse, not for a teacher to prescribe treatment such as you get from a psychologist suggestion. It is not the job of schools to teach morals. Think about it this way. With these practices, if you dig into them, do you need them in college and universities? You have consequences in life. For the workplace, why would you not utilize the very best practices, the tried, proven practices? It's very possible that a lot of the advocates for this are, I'm sure many of them are earnest, because you see teachers that come to school board meetings, they're in tears and they say, well, they like the idea, but it's just not working. There's probably some that aren't so earnest. And there was a Project Veritas video where it's obvious, and there's been other videos, instances of schools buying programs, whether it's math or whatever, something new and different to make money. There's a lot of money in public schools, so you'd assume, and like every other profession, is going to be corruption and grifters. So when it comes to restorative justice practices, there could be that. There's also, it seems to me, some might view this as super cynical, that they're saying, okay, well, you have the school in a sort of downtrodden area, maybe West Memphis, Arkansas, versus a school in Martha's Vineyard. very wealthy people. Those schools, that school in West Memphis, Arkansas, that doesn't have there, and maybe it's different, but in the past, this town has a reputation for a lot of violence. Well, you could never, ever, according to these people, have the same discipline standards in school that you would, say, in a wealthy area, an affluent area like Martha's Vineyard. So you can never have and it will always never change because you can never have it. You can never have schools without lots of disruptions and violence in that case, because the experts are telling you they'd have to kick out 25, 30, 40% of the school every year. That's the picture that they will paint. I don't think that's really the way it might work. I think parents should come around to getting a hold of the situation. They want their kids to go to school, and teachers want a safe environment to work in. So they're both wanting the same things. But this is what I hear the folks that are all for equity is they are saying you can never have that. You can never have a school in certain places without a lot of disruption and violence, which means you're going to have very low academic achievement. So you can never achieve what this other affluent area can achieve. It can never happen. And it doesn't matter how much money you put into the school either. You can never have that. So to summarize, I think these panelists undercut their argument whenever they talk about this. For parents, this sounds like a really bad situation in a lot of schools in Gwinnett County. I mean, every school isn't terrible, but if you're in a situation like that, you got to try to do whatever you can to protect your child and get them out of that situation and get them into a better school. It's also, I don't really understand why Mr. Downer, I would suspect Mr. Downer and Ms. Tillman would be vehemently opposed to school choice. Imagine if their program were so great, why aren't private schools doing this on their own? Why? I mean, you don't need the government to implement these things. You could do this at a private school. Did they present an example? Does an example exist where private schools are all in on this sort of program that they think is best? I don't think so. And if you have school choice and you're a parent, would you send your well-behaved child that you've worked so hard to raise and that treat others as they wish to be treated? If you did that, would you really want them to go to a school where there's disruption and violence that's dealt with after the fact? Now, the advocates will say that you're doing all of these things it's a preventive measures, but consequences exist throughout all our society and across the world. There's always consequences, punishments, if you will. And it's unconscionable to me to not treat, especially teenagers, as adults. Behave like adults, not like children. So that's my episode today. I wish parents a lot of luck in Gwinnett County. I think you're going to need it because the school board, as I said before, the school board really needs to be rotated out. And I suggest you advocate for school choice and get your kids out of the bad school. So that's my advice for today, or my episode for today. Appreciate you watching. If you like the content, please subscribe, like, share, comment. Thank you.